Hello and welcome to today's video. In today's video I'm going to be discussing why Andrew Tate is such an important target for the regime, the Matrix, or whatever you want to call it. I feel that I want to talk about this because a lot of people who are involved in the Sensible Centre don't seem to understand that certain people are more dangerous to the regime than others, and even if certain people are not necessarily sensible centrists themselves, these people will still be a threat to the octopus. And I'd like to apply the logic and the reasoning, the enemy of my enemy is my friend some of the time. And I know lots of Christian conservatives don't like Andrew Tate because of the lifestyle he advocates. That said, I think it's very important to consider what can someone do for you and what can you learn from that person before dismissing someone as a political enemy. Because lots of people on the Sensible Centre don't seem to understand that Andrew Tate is a very powerful individual who is more towards the sensible centrist direction than not. He's certainly got sympathies with the Sensible Centre, so there's no reason why the Sensible Centre could not use Andrew Tate's sympathies towards us to our own benefit. I'm going to go through what Andrew Tate does and certain things that give him power and why he's such an important target, because I think this is important for sensible centrists to understand. And there are some things that can be learned from Andrew Tate, and I think if sensible centrists were to learn these things, it would increase the political effectiveness of sensible centrists. Andrew Tate has a massive network. The War Room has hundreds, if not thousands, of members of people who can afford to pay the entry requirement, which is quite a lot of money. I think it's about £5,000 at the moment. And okay, it wasn't that expensive a couple of years ago. It used to be £500, but still, he has a community or a network of people that are very affluent who can pay a significant amount to join an event or join a club and then come to those events. And Andrew Tate is the figurehead and the leader. It would be like having a golf club that's quite expensive and having the golf club be every member who can afford to pay the entry fee being on the same wavelength in terms of political and social goals. So the War Room and Hustlers University are very important assets. I often find myself thinking that if the Sensible Centre were to have some kind of war room, which would be an organisation where people have to pay to join, and those people would be tested in terms of trustworthiness and they'd learn skills on political organisation, that community or that organisation would be very effective. Hustlers University, for that matter, is cheaper than the War Room, but it's much larger. There are 100,000 people in it, or something. I think it's 120. It's quite a lot of people who are paying $50 a month to Andrew Tate so that they can learn business lessons. And lots of people in Hustlers University are doing quite well financially because of the things you learn in Hustlers University. But Andrew Tate has said that Hustlers University is a brilliant opportunity for him to raise money. He said in an estimate that he could probably raise a couple of billion from Hustlers University. And that makes him very dangerous because he is someone who is not conventional in terms of political views, though he's not a sensible centrist. He certainly has sensible centrist sympathies, and the regime, the octopus, whichever you want to call it, would be very foolish to ignore someone like Andrew Tate, who can raise billions of dollars at a drop of a hat, whether that's for political purposes or for business purposes. Mostly Andrew Tate isn't really that involved in politics. He's more towards the business side of things, but I don't think the regime would be wise to ignore Andrew Tate because he has this network. Inspiration. It's going to be very hard to get massive compliance with another COVID when Andrew Tate is as famous as he is. During COVID, Andrew Tate was running around the world, multiple passports. I don't think he spent more than a week in lockdown. In terms of inspiration, Andrew Tate wasn't as famous as he is now during COVID. He got famous at the end of COVID or after it. It's going to be very difficult, come what may, come what the next lockdown or the next scam, for people to comply blindly with the government narrative and the government instructions, because Andrew Tate in 2022 was the most Googled person. He was even more famous than Kim Kardashian that year. And Andrew Tate is openly against lockdowns. He's openly against certain left-wing policies, and he has certain views on women, which some people find distasteful. I'm not going to share my opinions on them. But it's with someone as famous as Andrew Tate, it's going to be very hard for the next lockdown to achieve compliance or even the passive consent of most people, because someone like Andrew Tate, in a video he made during the lockdown, said, don't bother getting arrested, just refuse to wear a mask until you're asked to. Make them go get you one. And he made the point in the video that if enough people do that, it would be very hard for consent to be manufactured or tacit consent to be given for something like lockdown. Andrew Tate wasn't that famous during lockdown. He got famous during lockdown, but he didn't get as famous as he is now. What it's important to note from this is, if there was another lockdown and you had someone just as famous as Andrew Tate saying, make people or give you a mask, don't wear one unless you're asked, it would be much harder the second time around for something like lockdown to be implemented. So it's very dangerous for the regime, the octopus, to have someone like Andrew Tate who's openly hostile to them and amass such a large following. Because though I'm an elitist, I'm into elite theory, the great unwashed masses on their own won't achieve much. But if you've got someone like Andrew Tate on the internet telling people don't wear the mask, very quickly you would have enough people not complying that forcing compliance would be very difficult, if not impossible. Andrew Tate bought a bank or a payment processor. This is something that's been quite difficult for the sensible centre, because sensible centrists often get deplatformed from payment processors. And the same thing happened to Andrew Tate, and he was rich enough to just buy one. What Andrew Tate is doing by buying a bank or a payment processor is, I do appreciate they're not the same thing. What he's doing is he's threatening the octopus's monopoly on financial services, specifically payment processors. That's very dangerous, because it means that if someone like Andrew Tate can't be deplatformed because he's just bought a payment processor, it's entirely possible for Mark Collette to resist deplatforming, or Alex Jones, or anyone else you care to name, because they could potentially, though I should say there weren't necessarily plans to expand the payment processor to others, but it's perfectly possible for someone like Andrew Tate to give away and give access and sell access to his payment processor to the likes of Alex Jones and others like him. It should be clear from what I've said that Andrew Tate is not just some internet personality. He is someone who is genuinely dangerous towards the octopus. Eliza Blue said in an interview with Tim Pool, Andrew Tate doesn't say anything controversial or anything that Tim Pool doesn't say. I mean, that might be true, but Andrew Tate does things that Tim Pool doesn't. So I think that's important to bear in mind. What you say doesn't necessarily make you dangerous to the octopus. It's what you do. If you are saying things and you have a huge audience like Andrew Tate does, then if you're giving your audience instructions, at a certain point you do become dangerous. But someone like Tim Pool, who's just reporting and talking about politics, though he has a large following, he's nowhere near as dangerous as Andrew Tate, because he's not a very good rallying point or where someone can organise. Tim Pool also, I don't think, will be very good at raising money for political infrastructure such as media organisations, legal organisations, policy institutes and that type of thing, whereas someone like Andrew Tate probably could. I want to talk about something else as well. A lot of people who are very wealthy, who have come out to be either sensibly centrist sympathetic or adjacent to sensible centrists, have either killed themselves or been hushed up and been counselled and gone after to a ridiculous degree. Billionaires, multimillionaires on their own are vulnerable, whereas if the sensible centre could organise these multimillionaires and billionaires who are dissidents, they'd be a lot harder for the regime to go for. And also, having that kind of financial base would enable the sensible centre to become politically successful in certain areas. Not overnight, it would take time. Building political infrastructure does take time. However, if in the future the sensible centre could be a rallying point and could organise dissident elites, it would be possible for the sensible centre to start winning significant political gains. Thank you very much for watching. Please check out the links below, especially my Open Oratory Locals page, which should help you improve your public speaking.